Once upon a time, in the socialist paradise of the best Korea, the supreme leader demanded supreme entertainment for his people. Yes, our dear leader, Kim Jong-il, had a grand vision. The man best known for Hennessy, platform shoes, immaculate hair, and a battlesuit, branded himself not as a dictator, but a director. Behind palace walls, he hoarded Hollywood action tapes, devoured kung fu imports, and memorized every scene of the James Bond series. In public, he proclaimed that cinema is the nation's most important art, and runs the ultimate propaganda studio in the kingdom. Legend has it that the Daddy Kim had amassed a private collection of 20,000 films in a climate-controlled vault. In this episode, we roll the camera on Kim Jong-il's bizarre artistic obsession, from the mythic origins of his cinematic addiction to hijacking South Korean stars, and the spectacular propaganda blockbusters that followed. When socialism met Spielberg, film became indistinguishable from ideology, and every scene had to serve the party. Buckle up. Let's dig in.
Kim Jong-il indicated a road of building Juche-based art and literature and gave energetic guidance to this sector.
Kim Jong-il's life reads like a film script, or rather like the propaganda reel his father wanted everyone to see. Official North Korean law has it that in 1942, on the snowy slopes of Mount Paektu, the infant Kim was born with double rainbows arching overhead and a star blazing in the sky. On the very same day that he was born, a mighty storm parted clouds over Japan. He started walking at the age of 1 week and talking at the 8th week. In one propaganda anecdote, 3-year-old film genius Kim point blank directed his babysitters. It was at a test screening of an early North Korean movie. The little Kim barked, "That Japanese map is wrong." No one else saw the mistake, but sure enough, the scene was reshot. By age 7, the boy allegedly critiqued a snowy battle sequence and demanded redos so that even the enemy soldiers' heads were dusted with snow. Everyone cried "genius" on the site. It sounds like parody, but these are the tall tales in Kim's official biography, which clearly portray him as a child prodigy of the real. Of course, everybody knows that in reality, Kim Jong-il's life was not a Juche blockbuster. Historians generally agree that Kim was actually born in a Soviet military camp and under a different name. The regime would later relocate his birthplace to Mount Paektu, since even dictators need a mystical origin story. Born in either 1941 or 1942, Kim's early years were spent shuttling around battalion barracks, not on a cinematic mountaintop. But myth-making was Kim's tool. In the land of eternal propaganda, if a storm rages over Tokyo because a toddler doodled on a map, that must be true. Yet, although his childhood marvels were made up, Kim's love of film was undoubtedly real. Legend has it that as a teenager he launched something called Operation 100, a secret project to turn North Korean embassies worldwide into Hollywood bootlegging hubs. Staffers scoured the latest Western releases, action flicks, sci-fi, gangster films, you name it, and smuggled them back in sealed diplomatic pouches.
Leader Kim Jong-il put forward original theories on cinema art and led in person to bring about revolution in the field of cinema. He regarded movie actors and actresses as his companions and cameras in the revolution.
A 100-strong unit in Pyongyang would then furiously subtitle and dub these forbidden treasures into Korean. By the late 1960s, the young future leader had accumulated a private archive of 20,000 plus films, stored in a climate-controlled vault that only he had access to. James Bond, Friday the 13th slashers, something called Rambo, Kim loved them all. Chained to a project of self-education, he'd pull all-nighters with cigarettes and espresso, scribbling notes on pacing, camera moves, action tricks, gunfights. It was less a hobby than a one-man film school, designed by a man who believed national salvation lay somewhere between a car race and a tracking shot. His dream? A cinematic utopia soaked in celluloid. Crucially, the young Kim knew film was no mere entertainment. It was mind control. As he later mused, when the projector beam lights up an audience's eyes, every shot, every cut, every camera angle is a suggestion, subtly manipulating viewers on a subconscious level. The person telling the story rules the world. Based on Kim's theory of film, if politicians can hook millions with a story, imagine what a movie can do. The lesson sank in deep. A gripping yarn could make people believe anything, including that great leader Kim Il-sung was the son of Korea. If a story can conquer, Kim Jong-il wanted to master it. Meanwhile, across the 38th parallel, South Korea's film industry was exploding. In the 1960s, under Park Chung-hee, Korean auteurs were winning international awards. Kim Jong-il seethed. It seems that the South had all those creative talents. Well, it should be self-explanatory. Creativity does not thrive under supervision. In Pyongyang, every script was pre-approved, every camera angle inspected for ideological purity, and every smile calibrated to glorify the revolution. Art was free, so long as it served the state. At international festivals, North Korea's entries arrived with stirring titles like The Flower Girl or A True Daughter of the Party, where peasants wept on cue and villains conveniently loved capitalism. The juries applauded politely, unsure whether they were watching a cinema or a confession. In a way, they were right. Under Kim's direction, propaganda itself became the nation's only art form.
A woman with thorny history in early days. I found heydays in my career under the wings of leader Kim Jong-il.
지금이라도 내 말만 들으면 징용을 면할 수가 있다.
왜 이래요?
너 정말 내 말 안 들을 테냐?
By the mid-1960s, Kim Jong-il was no longer just the president's son. He was being groomed for the throne. And he knew the way to grab power was through the silver screen. In 1966, a secret Politburo meeting shifted the cinematic gears of the Hermit Kingdom. Grandpa Kim asked aloud, "Who will resurrect our flagging film studio?" A voice from the back of the room answered, "I will." It was 25-year-old Kim Jong-il, fresh off film bootleg binges, raising his hand like he owned that chair. Overnight, he was put in charge of all motion pictures, drama, and arts. The young heir became the propaganda and agitation department's director of cinema. Kim Jong-il took to the job like a deranged auteur. His manifesto, On the Art of the Cinema, published in 1973, would later formalize his subliminal film theories. But long before that, he was already flooding reels with nationalist myth. Traditional North Korean cinema had always been that dull Soviet-style stuff. Wooden heroes, grey lighting, endless monologues. Kim wanted widescreen epics, with blood, betrayal, and revolutionary passion. With his father writing scripts, Kim produced the first of many revolutionary sagas. His debut project was the film adaptation of Sea of Blood, a glorified retelling of Kim Il-sung's guerrilla war against the Japanese. We're not talking indie doc. This was a 4-hour operatic spectacle and was recognized as one of the 5 great revolutionary operas. The film is completed with stormy music, tear-jerking performances, and enough melodrama to rival Gone with the Wind. Every frame screamed, Kim Il-sung personally liberated Korea single-handedly, and anyone who says otherwise will be publicly hanged. The Red Army? Edited out. Stalin? Nowhere to be seen. Chinese PLA allies? Too trivial to tell. This was North Korea. Reality checks were not part of the script. Audiences were literally forced to watch such films, sometimes as mass events. Reports say people had to attend screenings and then answer quizzes on the lessons. The slogan was, "Let the electricity of Juche illuminate the hearts." It was film noir for Stalinists. No credit rolls, no standing ovations, and no names worth remembering, except the one at the top. Star actresses and cameramen vanished into the collective. Recognition came in stranger forms. After finishing production, Kim will print the actor's face on some postage stamps. The message was unmistakable. Film wasn't just entertainment, it was the state's scripture on film. Sea of Blood was a massive hit in a very closed market, so Kim decided to double down. His next cinematic attempt was The Flower Girl. Ostensibly the story of a poor girl selling flowers under Japanese occupation, it was essentially a revolutionary opera in movie form. The heroine toils in rags for an ailing mother and a blinded sister, before insurgent freedom fighters, led of course by Kim Il-sung, swoop in to overthrow the evil landlord. Audiences wept into rivers. Film critics, mostly the women over 50 forced into theatres, swooned. Kim Jong-il lauded it as a triumph of socialist realism. It even earned an international nod. Flower Girl became the first North Korean movie to win a foreign award in Czechoslovakia, though South Korea banned it as enemy propaganda. In the North, it was everywhere, practically on a loop. Thousands of daily screenings in China during the Cultural Revolution had audiences sobbing into handkerchiefs. The film's star, Hong Yong-hee, became such a super celeb that by the 1970s, her face was literally printed on money. Kim saw cinema not just as art, but as a career ladder. In reality, cinematography was his chosen field of palace intrigue. He kept up his studies. His treatise on the art of the cinema codified all his film philosophies, like his idea that each movie must have an ideological seed. But behind the scenes, the real plot was his own political promotion. By being the film czar, he consolidated power, proving himself more useful to the regime's narrative than any military general. His dad gladly approved his achievements. A Kim with creative mind control over culture was all the Juche godfather wanted. Year by year, Kim rendered more propaganda into cinema. Wars, famines, and happy peasants all had to fit into musicals or melodramas. He insisted on the glorious punchline, "Let the flames of revolution burn forever bright." In style, these films were bombastic. In practice, Kim's film studio became a kind of cinematic Kremlin. Writers, directors, and cinematographers worked under tight control. I mean, the literal tight control. Mistakes were costly. They meant endless rewrites at best, handling by the party at worst. One legendary tale tells of a director who was executed for presenting Kim with a script that failed to inspire the proletariat. If you've watched our Loverboy episode, you know the dear leader found his true love in the film industry. Kim Jong-il had multiple actress girlfriends. He was rumored to have affairs with his film stars, hosting decadent parties behind palace walls, and possibly fathering, and later disowning, a few inconvenient children. In Kim's mind, This wasn't a scandal. It was method acting, a mogul mingling with his stars to ensure a devotion that couldn't be faked. According to defector accounts, some actresses spiraled into breakdowns. Others smiled too brightly, like moths hypnotized by the heat of power. In North Korea, fear wasn't induced by horror movies. Fear was a method of mind control that the dear leader used on his film crews. Although North Korea had a flourishing film industry under the marvelous guidance of Kim Jong-il, there was one thing that he envied about the South. The Kim wanted that trophy from Cannes. To Kim, South Korean cinema was timeless cultural masterpieces, while his own studio spotted on recycled slogans and revolutionary dance shows. Desperate for a blockbuster brain transplant, but too nationalist to import a Western mind, he arrived at a perfectly elegant solution. If North Korea couldn't grow talent, it would have to abduct it from the South. And so began a plot stranger than fiction, one where the dear leader, armed with ideology and a kidnapping squad, set out to cast his own cinematic salvation.
Kim Jong-il was widely known as a film buff. He ordered to bring the two stars whom he admired for a long time. Their mission was to help develop North Korea's film quality. After their dramatic reunion, Choi and Shin made 17 films under the full support of Kim Jong-il. And their mission succeeded in improving the quality of North Korean films.
By the late 1970s, Kim's films were domestic megaphones, but they barely had any influence abroad. The Kim hungered for the prestige and the accolades. He wanted Oscars and Golden Bear, not just those that demanded applause from school children. So he did what any self-respecting cinematic tyrant with unchecked powers would do. He kidnapped the talent. In January 1978, an aging Korean matriarch of cinema named Choi Eun-hee was lured to a fake job interview in Hong Kong. In a scene straight out of an espionage thriller, Choi walked on a beachfront and was ambushed by North Korean agents in disguise. Two speedboats roared up, their crew in wigs and sunnies. The next minute, poor Choi was bundled into a dinghy and thrown out to sea. 6 days later, she arrived, not in Cannes or Seoul, but in her own country's north, where she was greeted not as a hero, but as an honored prisoner in a luxury villa. Choi's crime? She was South Korea's most glamorous actress. In Kim's eyes, prime property. But one actress isn't enough to run a film studio. 6 months after Choi's disappearance, Kim sent his agents to abduct her ex-husband, Shin Sang-ok, one of Korea's most celebrated directors. Shin drove himself to the same old crossroads by Repulse Bay in Hong Kong, and those agents struck again. Just in a few moments, the regime had secured its prize. South Korea's film star couple, now under lock and key. The early years of their captivity were hellish. Choi was languishing in comfortable isolation, surrounded by luxury, but steadily worn down. Her will was broken not through violence, but through silence and control. Kim Jong-il played the part of a strange warden. He kept both stars under constant surveillance, yet treated them just well enough to make the idea of a defection seem plausible to outsiders. Shin wasn't lucky. He tried to flee by stealing a car and heading for China, only to get caught at the border and thrown into prison. He spent nearly 3 years in a labor camp, learning firsthand what would happen in the kingdom when the script didn't go according to the leader's plan. And then, all of a sudden, Kim called them in. In March 1983, the estranged duo met at a party called by the dear leader. It was their first meeting in 5 years. Kim clapped them on the back and said the oddest thing one can imagine. They should get back to living together. He arranged their remarriage ceremony himself, playing priest over the podium. It was a forced happy ending conjured at gunpoint, and immediately thereafter cameras turned on. No honeymoon. Instead, Kim slammed them on a pushing schedule to make films. Under Kim's orders, Shin and Choi produced a jaw-dropping 17 films, both long and short, in just 2 years, a pace faster than Bollywood musicals. Kim Jong-il didn't want dull propaganda. He wanted blockbusters that have an international impact. He ordered gymnastic stunts in Pyongyang, choreographed like a Hong Kong kung fu show, and he commissioned musicals where peasants line danced with guns in their hands. The state studio was overflowing with resources, but it still lacked spark. Kim turned Shin into his personal showrunner and demanded his cinematic vision. They made epics and fairy tales, period pieces, and a kung fu fantasy. Shin joked later that he had become the Orson Welles of Pyongyang, except every script had to end with a salute to Kim Il-sung. Kim told them bluntly that North Korean filmmakers were slacking, so he picked up the best from the South. For the couple, it was a dream job, or nightmare, depending on how they actually saw it, working around the clock, exhausted, but with state support, unlimited budget, and a gun pointed at your head. And yes, one of those forced works was a Godzilla-like movie. But instead of electricity claws, it had juche claws. When Shin heard the deadline, he reportedly muttered, "I'd rather kill myself." But Kim insisted on the schedule. The monster would be called Pulgasari.
Leader Kim Jong-il in his work on film art says that an actor must not mechanically copy the character and the scenario, but create one in his own way.
By this point in the dear leader's cinematic reign, the official catalogue of North Korean films had evolved into something resembling a hall of fame. These were not films in the conventional sense. They were state sermons, soaked in revolutionary fervor and visual spectacle. Each production was crafted to serve a dual purpose: to entertain just enough to keep viewers watching, and to indoctrinate thoroughly enough to keep them obedient. Plotlines were often simplistic, characters archetypal, and resolutions predetermined by the demands of juche thought. It was cinema for statecraft. Let us now turn to those fabulous titles, examine some of the flagship productions that captured the essence of North Korean filmmaking under Kim Jong-il. Sea of Blood is the real OG. This 2-part revolutionary opera film tells how oppressed Koreans under Kim Il-sung's guerrillas suffer brutal hardship at the hands of Japanese occupiers. There are lakes of tears and oceans of blood, hence the title, culminating in the triumphant birth of socialism. Every character sacrifices, every song swells. The film's lesson is on the nose. Anyone who opposes the Kim dynasty meets a bloody end. The soundtrack gave birth to My Heart Will Remain Faithful, a tearjerker anthem still crooned at official events. In style, it was epic. As we said, it ran 4 hours. For American audiences, it's roughly Avengers Endgame length, only with fewer jokes and more sobbing patriots. Salt, published in 1985, was a Shin and Choi project midway through their captivity. It is a 1930s period melodrama about underground resistance. A struggling father is killed by Japanese police, and his widow, played by Chae Eun-hee, ends up smuggling illegal salt to feed her family. Amid the salt marshes and black market warehouses, she was attacked by Japanese thugs, but saved by communist guerrillas. She realizes at last that communism is good, and the guerrillas fight for ordinary people. Ostensibly a commercial-sounding caper, it's really a hidden propaganda piece. Your friendly neighborhood communists are equal to good guys. Our oppressive landlord and Japanese police are always the bad guys. Oh, and corrupt rich Koreans can turn into villains too. In this one, a local merchant lures Choi's character into a trap, after which only the communists come to her rescue. North Korea proudly entered Salt into foreign film festivals, and shockingly, Choi won Best Actress at the Moscow Film Fest for it. Kim Jong-il declared it proof that North Korean films could be internationally credible. But in reality, everyone knows that Salt was a cliché. Our country is the best type of soap drama. Then we have Pulgasari in 1985, the infamous socialist Godzilla. Perhaps nothing illustrates Kim's mindset more than this creaking monster movie. The story is medieval Korea. Peasants toil under a greedy king. A little girl pricks her finger and lo, blood brings to life a tiny toy goblin made of rice. That toy grows into a 50-foot metal-eating monster who defends the peasants. But even Pulgasari has its limits. He starts eating all the farmer's tools, so the girl sacrifices herself by literally turning into his lunch, and Pulgasari explodes. The moral? Revolutions can be both heroes and threats. It was meant as a fanciful parable. Topple tyranny, but be wary of creating something you can't control. Production-wise, this was North Korea's most expensive movie to date, with a budget topped $2 to $3 million in that era. Kim didn't skimp. He flew in 15 Toho Studios special effects pros, aka the original Godzilla team, to handle the monster suit. The scale is grandiose. Armies battling the rubbery Pulgasari, peasants cheering with torches. Today, Pulgasari is a cult curiosity on YouTube. At the time, Kim acclaimed it as a groundbreaking North Korean fantasy film. But as one defector later quipped, it might have been the worst movie they ever made. Though the leader was thrilled, Pulgasari even got Kim Jong-il an executive producer credit plastered on the posters. In reality, Shin Sang-ok hated Pulgasari. After it screened, he threw up in disgust. But Kim loved it so much he greenlit a sequel. Finally, A Broad Bellflower, aired in 1987, is often touted as a rural masterpiece. This film was Kim Jong-il's attempt to prove that North Korean cinema could produce something more than war, Japanese occupation, and class struggle. Yes, North Korea had its own romance. Or at least, a special type of romance reimagined by the Ministry of Propaganda. In a fog-draped mountain village, two orphaned sisters try to build a future out of collective mud and post-war rubble. The elder sister believes in tractors, slogans, and the promise of rural socialism. Nonetheless, she falls in love with a local man who preferred the city lights instead of rural scenery. The emotional climax isn't a kiss, it's a speech about collectivized agriculture. So they broke up. The big sis dies in a rainstorm, leaving behind a partially electrified village and a younger sister now tasked with fulfilling the revolutionary dreams. Years pass, the fields bloom, and one day, ex-lover's son returns to the village, inherited his father's guilt of leaving the countryside for the city dream. What makes A Broad Bellflower notable is its sheer devotion to restraint. There are no major villains, no explosions, no capitalist saboteurs lurking in the shadows. The film's tension hinges on whether the village's potato yield will meet state targets. And yet, it was a domestic sensation. North Korean critics hailed it as a symphony of sincerity, and the lead actress was paraded across state media as the ideal revolutionary woman, loyal, tireless, and remarkably selfless. In other countries, this would have been a quiet slice-of-life romance. In North Korea, it was a parable that love is permitted by the party, as long as it doesn't distract from reaching your production quotas. There were other interesting pieces too. Runaway, a World War II-era tearjerker where a guy blows up a Japanese train. Emissary of No Return, a Korean War propaganda flick. Shimchong, a musical about filial piety. Shin and Choi also made a kung fu comedy, Honkil-dong, which ironically was praised as one of NK's first pure entertainment films. In any case, the film content was unmistakably clear. Suffering under the capitalist or colonial oppressors, and salvation arrives only when the Workers' Party fights for you. Realism and nuance had no place in the unique cinematic world of DPRK. Kim Jong-il didn't just make abstract orders about films. He micromanaged them to the extreme, treating each project deadly serious, as a war zone for spectacle. When Shin Sang-ok or other directors said, "This scene needs a train blowing up," Kim acted like Spielberg on steroids. He literally sent over a real locomotive packed with dynamite. No model, no CGI, the real thing. The resulting boom would have made old Buster Keaton chuckle at how weedy his explosions were. Lighting a fire on a budget? Kim's reply, use an actual fire brigade. Need a hurricane or dramatic wind for a battle? Why blow fans when you can bring in army helicopters? Legend has it that Shin once timidly asked for wind machines for a storm scene, and Kim peeled off a military helicopter squad. Helicopters hovered above, whipping the land and the actor's hair. Filmmaking gear rarely got this sort of military upgrade. Want snow for a scene in spring? Not a problem. Kim would delay the shoot and fly everyone to a mountain peak where winter still held court. Budget was out of the question. Tanks, rifles, and artillery rolls were just part of the props inventory. When Salt needed Japanese soldiers, North Korea didn't hire actors. They simply dressed up members of the Korean People's Army in period uniforms and sent them onto the set. For Pulgasari, the cheering crowds of peasants weren't extras either. They were real villagers, rounded up for the day and paid in rice. The military even staged entire battle scenes for the camera. Rockets were launched, machine guns fired, all perfectly timed to Kim Jong-il's voice echoing from a backlot tent, directing the action like a general commanding war, or a filmmaker playing God. Meanwhile, Kim sat at editing table, sipping his glass of cognac. He chain-smoked imported cigarettes to stay awake through all-night cuts. Cameos were commonplace. Any general with a bone to pick could stroll onto set to consult. It was less filmmaking than theatre of the absurd, with a standing army orchestra. Crew members often told shock tales of film units rushing through rice paddies, chased by goats, or cameras nearly crushed by cavalry charges. For them, the line between real and real was hilariously blurred. Kim's mania even affected film gear. North Korea lagged technologically, so if a shot called for a camera crane, crews improvised by sticking cameras on tree stumps. When they first tried colour, a costly novelty, Kim insisted on widescreen, so we feel like inside the scene. This was Kim's idea. Widescreen format shows emotional changes better, he pronounced. He liked to think of himself as a visionary in cinema tech. In short, Kim's studio had unlimited practical effects. There was one film where the script demanded a holy mountain collapsing. Someone dynamited a mountain cliff for real. When asked if they could do something impossible, the North Korean crew's answer was simply, "Yes, sir, how soon?" Under Kim's command, the films became national projects. The whole country was a taxpayer-funded special effects lab. By Hollywood standards, they were preposterous. To Kim, they were patriotic extravaganzas.
Just a point. The benevolent care of leader Kim Jong-il is the cradle of the Korean film stars, a cradle where they make their career brilliant, a cradle where more and more stars will be born in the world of the Korean cinema.
Well, North Korea became one of the most film-saturated societies ever, but not in a good way. Within its borders, the film campaigns cemented the cult of personality. Generation after generation learned the approved heroic narratives as if they were childhood cartoons. These movies were the propaganda victory lap for everything the regime did. collective farming, the independent war, the arduous march, all under the Juche cinematic license. Citizens quizzed on each film's theme learned to regurgitate the lessons: sacrifice, loyalty, and the great leader's wisdom. The visuals from Flower Girl and Sea of Blood, such as the shattered windows and Nazi flag, were seared into national memory. Outside Korea and the sympathetic Eastern Bloc, these films were seen as curiosities at best and distortions at worst. When Flower Girl won its prize in Karlovy Vary, it caused bewilderment. A communist director paid an officially decorated film to communists. The critics' reviews of Pulgasari and others in the West only made them cult oddities. Kim did get some attention as a freaky dictator director, but not the blockbuster legend he wanted. North Korea never had its own Tarkovsky, and its cinema never quite matched the Soviet level that Kim had dreamed about. Back home, movie audiences remained captive. People joked that watching a state film was like having to salute multiple times per viewing, such as at the start of the film when quotes of Kim Il-sung are narrated, and at the scene where the communists defeated the evil landlords. In the classroom, the school children are being asked, what was the point of that film? The pressure was absurd. Every North Korean was educated to be a film critic. Yet some audiences did weep at these tragic hero plots, partly because the stories were emotionally manipulative, and partly because, in a society without humor, crying in public was one of the few acceptable forms of emotional release.
But North Korea just wasn't the right place for the artistic couple.
그때 우리가 오지리를 선택한 이유는 거기는 이제 우려고 그렇게 약속이
After
되기
carefully
때문에
seeking a day to escape the Hermit Kingdom, they chose March 13, 1986 as their D-Day for escape.
저쪽 건너방에서 계속 이제 있으면서 저희 잡담하고 아마 뭐 호카라든가
While in Vienna, where they were discussing their next film, they fled to the U.S. Embassy after shaking off North Korean guards.
After Shin and Choi escaped in 1986, Kim's movie empire instantly crashed. The few films after that were just repeats of old formulas or cheap copies of international hits. In the 1990s, he had his producers study Titanic, then essentially told them, make that. The result was Seoul's Protest, a weird kind of Titanic movie about a slave ship. It was reportedly 4 hours of burning dialogues and wooden acting. The world largely mocked it. Within the North, it was quietly shoved aside. They tried TV dramas too, but nobody overseas cared. Inside, people eventually switched to smuggled Chinese soap operas on bootleg VCDs for real entertainment. Beyond media fatigue, Kim Jong-il's cinematic legacy proved to be a hollow one. He had demonstrated what he likely feared all along. When you turn an art form into pure propaganda, all you're left with is propaganda. Cinema became another tool for narrative control, not cultural influence. Abroad, his films failed to win hearts or any meaningful award. By the late 2000s, the North Korean film industry was practically a joke. But you know, it's not bad. In the 80s, it was said that audiences in Pyongyang quietly pitied one another. Here we are again, pretending to cry over Grandpa Kim's revolution, like it's the first time. Now, not many revolutionary films to watch and sob about, though tears are still mandatory on other occasions.
I'm so lonely, so lonely, so lonely inside real Rome. There's no one, just me only, sitting on my little throne. I work very hard.
Kim Jong-il's film career reads like a cautionary tale, a twisted, dark comedy of one man's dream to be both God and George Lucas. He spent decades scripting an alternate reality on celluloid and ordering reality to catch up. Kim tried to edit people's memories according to the Juche ideology and was enthusiastic to prove that cinema can be a mighty tool of persuasion. For us, the audience outside Pyongyang's laser projector, let's ponder this. What propaganda lurks in the stories around us, as innocuous as summer blockbusters? Every regime loves the arts. Ours is no exception. We cheer films that reinforce familiar ideas. Think about it next time you watch Channel News or an all-American superhero movie. Who is showing up to save the world, and who gets credited? Who wrote the script of your history and your identity? Kim used cinema like a hammer to nail the perfect myth, the one that made a personality cult grow without question and out of control. It was effective within North Korea's sealed borders, but the world saw his films for what they were: absurd, overly long, comedic tragedies. In the end, Kim's greatest triumph was not a film at all, but a reminder that storytelling holds real power. When dictators take the director's chair, the final cut can be terribly dangerous.
The revolutionary armed forces of the Workers' Party of Korea have grown to be an ever-victorious, still-like army under the banner of mothering the entire army.